is being recorded. And the recording will be available on Orange County's website, specifically at orangecountygov.com/sustainability. I will put that into the chat box. I've also added to the chat box the registration link, which is all at the same website, our website, orangecountygov.com/sustainability. That's where you can register, and that's where all the recordings live from all of our celebration and observances of Climate Solution Week, as well as our March Madness series. So there's a lot of good stuff archived there. Lastly, credits can be granted for your attendance in this class, but it is up to your municipality if they will honor them as part of the New York State Mandatory Planning and Zoning Board official training. Really, lastly, I believe we have a Sustainable Hudson Valley employee here who organized basically all of Climate Solutions Week, Chriso, and I'm going to ask him to put in the chat a post-webinar survey. So if you could please be so kind to fill that link out, we'd be grateful so we can continue doing and bringing you great programs in the future. So with that out of the way, welcome to Orange County Climate Solutions Week. We have a great lineup tonight of very talented speakers doing wonderful work. And many times, such great work only gets initiated due to the advocacy of tireless volunteers. Those are the ones that demand the Hudson River gets cleaned up. Those are the ones that demand protection of your trees. They're in your village and town halls. They're making the calls to their elected officials. And if there are any volunteer wannabes on the phone tonight, on the call tonight, and they're wondering how to get involved, please let me know via the chat box. One of my roles at the planning department is to help conservation advisory commissions, help them where they are now and help them get started. Conservation advisory commissions are also called CACs, or sometimes they're called environmental review boards or ERBs. Sometimes conservation boards, sometimes environmental advocacy groups. They have names, but the point is they're called something. They want to do conservation work, and most recently they're called climate smart communities, CSCs. I'm here to help you organize any of those things. So please get involved with me. If your municipality doesn't have a group like this, let me know and I could help you get through the process. I'll put my information in the chat, reach out to me. So let's get started. We start off with the town of Clarkstown Senior Planner James Creighton. Before he joined the planning department, he was with the city of Rensselaer. He's a former member of the Valley Cottage and Nanuet Volunteer Fire Departments and is an active member of the Rockland Riverfront Communities Council. Village of Montebello attorney Warren Bibbert will immediately follow Jim. Warren is a former electrical engineer and has served the village since its incorporation in 1896. He has
not
also,
1896. I'm old, but not that old.
What'd you say, 96?
1996, not 1896. I'm old, but not that old.
Did I say 18? I'm sorry, I got a little dyslexic there on you.
Thank you.
So 1986, folks, is when the village of Montebello was incorporated, and Warren was there on the front lines. He'll tell you more about that. He's also served as an elected trustee of the Suffering Free Library since 1996. See, I mixed them all up. He is a director of the Legal Aid Society and a member of the Judicial Screening Committee of the Rockland County Bar Association. Thank you, gentlemen, for presenting tonight. We appreciate your time. And Jim, please take it away.
Sure. Thank you very much. So I'm James Creighton, Senior Planner with the town of Clarkstown, Rockland County. I'm going to talk to you about our town's tree preservation law. It's been amended many times. I started with the town in 2007, which actually underwent an amendment that year. I was not involved. And then again in 2013 and 2020, I ended up drafting the law. And now I'm pretty much responsible for its upkeep. We are planning another amendment in 2024. I'll speak briefly about that later. I don't think I need to talk about the benefit of trees, the aesthetic value, the value to combating greenhouse gas and wildlife preservation, stormwater control. So I'll get right into how our law works. whenever a site plan or subdivision goes through our planning board, a tree preservation plan is required when any tree of a DBH, which is diameter at breast height, that's how mature trees are measured. Caliper is a measurement of trees from the nursery, young trees. So there is a difference between the two of them. They're not interchangeable. So when we talk about replanting, we use caliper. When we talk about surveying trees in the field, it's DBH. So anytime a tree with a DBH of 8 inches or greater, or any tree of a DBH of 3 inches or greater or 8 feet in height shown on a previously approved landscape plan is removed, a tree preservation plan is required to be submitted. If the plan is submitted and there are no trees to be removed of that size, there is no plan required, and the minimum tree density of 17 trees per acre is not required. That's something we're looking to work on in an update. I'd like all site plans and subdivisions to comply to some type of minimum tree density, but we haven't done that yet. So when the tree preservation plan is submitted, it has it illustrates on the plan all existing trees, indicating those to be removed and those to receive protection during the grading process, usually in the form of fencing. There are density calculations to show a pre and post tree density. If it turns out that tree density is over 17 trees per acre, then that's fine. Then no replanting is required. Should be noted that even if a tree preservation plan is not required, all site plans require a landscape plan to be submitted, which is reviewed by our Architectural and Historic Review Board, which is also responsible for reviewing landscape plans. That's done after preliminary approval by the site by the planning board is granted. So even if a tree preservation plan is not submitted, applicants are going to have to plant trees. They're going to have to present the landscape plan. If there are no trees or extensive landscaping, they're going to be required to do so. However, they're not bound to the 17 tree per acre minimum density. Also on large sites where usually the area near the frontage to the roadway is cleared for development, and a large quantity or a forested area of trees may exist at the rear of the site, we make the decision at our technical advisory committee meeting, which meets before planning board, as to whether or not we're only going to count the area of disturbance for that minimum density. That way you don't just have a collection of trees at the rear of the site, which no one really benefits from. Obviously they're important, but we want to make sure the entire site has plantings. So it's not always the 17 tree density for the entire site. Sometimes we narrow it down just to the area of disturbance. The 17 tree per acre density was actually developed. It was in the field. Surveys were conducted, sampling was done. They came up with 17 trees per acre. That comes out to about 2,500 square feet per tree, or picture a 50 by 50 square foot box per tree. If a tree preservation plan is submitted and it falls short of the minimum required density of 17 trees per acre, then tree replacement's required. And how that works is based on the size of the trees to be removed, descending in the order of largest tree to smallest, until the minimum density of 17 trees per acre is reached. Replacements, according to the table in front of you, have to be provided. So it starts with any trees greater than 28 inches, 4-inch caliper replacement deciduous or a 12-foot height evergreen needs to be provided. Once the 17 tree per acre density is reached, then no more trees are required. It's great if they're provided. Oftentimes extra trees are provided, but they're at 2.5-inch caliper, which don't count towards minimum density, but they're more than welcome to plant extra trees. If there's a deficit and the minimum density is not reached, there's a fee of $500 per tree until the deficit is reached, which gets put into the town tree fund for planting trees in other locations throughout the town. That doesn't happen too often. Usually it's on large sites that were developed in the 60s, 70s, where everything was clear cut and pavement often extends to the edge of the sites, and there's just not that much room for the planting of additional trees, maybe several landscaped islands in the parking area. We try to recommend taking up some of the pavement to allow for more planting areas. Sometimes it's not possible. I'd say in the last 10 years, there's only been 4 payments into the tree fund for that reason. So the second part of our tree preservation law, and we're going to come back to the tree preservation plan. I have a couple examples afterward, is the tree removal permit. These are issued to individual property owners on when tree removal is conducted. That's not part of a development reviewed by the planning board, either for landscaping, for safety purposes, and for the construction of single family homes on single lots, which is not reviewed by the planning board. So the rule of thumb, and I highlighted it in red, is you are permitted to take one tree with a DBH of 8 inches or greater per 5,000 square feet of area on a single property every 3 years. Typical suburban zoning ranges from 10,000 square feet parcels, 20,000, maybe a acre lot, 40,000. So you're looking at 2, 3, 4 trees of a DBH of 8 inches and greater every 3 years. Trees under that, you're not required to obtain a permit unless it's a designated protective native plant, or if it's in our historic district or in a historically designated property. Then any tree of 8 inches or greater, you're required to get a permit. Again, any tree or plant within a state or federal wetland or within 25 feet of the top of the bank of any drainage way, you'll need a permit no matter how many you're removing. Any tree on steep slopes, as defined elsewhere in our zoning ordinance. As it relates to the construction of single family homes, you need to submit a plot plan showing your tree removals. Any trees within 30 feet of the building footprint or a septic field or driveway are not included in that count. Any other trees are, and replacement is required as per the table 1 that I showed you before. So these permits are issued. I'm not involved in the issuance of these permits, so I don't have quite as much a background on this, but I spoke to our landscape architect who works on our engineering department a little bit about them. He says we get lots of them. Many are due to neighbor complaints and are issued as part of a violation. However, he told me that the local tree companies are a lot more attuned to our tree preservation law now, and he's seeing them come in quite a bit more. They understand the law, and fewer violations are being issued to clearance from a tree company. You do not need a tree removal permit for dead trees if you get that tree. And again, you can remove a tree if you're removing more than you are permitted by your lot size. You need the permit. You can take down a 20-inch caliper tree. You can take one down every year per 5,000 square feet. But if you're taking down a cluster of them and you exceed the number required, you can get an exemption if they're verified as dead by one of our town engineers or a certified arborist. Same thing with any trees that are posing a danger to your property, any invasive species, and obviously any tree shown to be removed on an approved tree preservation plan. So now just to look at a couple examples of the plans. This is a site just south of the Palisades Mall. It's received final approval. It's a Jaguar Land Rover dealership, just waiting endorsement by our planning board chair. It's in that empty lot. I believe there used to be a boat dealership back there. So I like this plan. It's very clear what's being done, and it's a good example of a site plan that's not removing trees that are not necessarily required to be removed. So if you look, the way they represented the trees to be removed is that they hashed off the areas of removal and gave counts. And you can see right up to the proposed pavement lines, trees are receiving tree protection. You know, sometimes you'll see, especially these trees that are really close to curbs, they'll just take them all out for construction ease. So it looks like they're doing their due diligence here, protecting the trees that should be protected. Over here is the tree density calculations. They laid it out really well. You can see it's a 3.4 acre site multiplied by 17 per acre, rounded up. That's 58 trees required. They're protecting 46. They're removing 65. So there's a deficit of 12. They're required to do 2 4-inch caliper, 9 3.5-inch caliper, 1 3-inch caliper. They're actually doing 6 4s and 16 3.5 caliper trees for a post-construction total of 68. So the site's in compliance. Example of subdivision. This is a cluster subdivision in West Nyack, the Greenie subdivision. This is a little older. we require that every lot of a subdivision comply with the minimum tree density of 17 per acre. This was a large site, so to get an idea of the overall density of this site, I believe these two circles in the middle of the subdivision plat represent sampling areas. There were some swampy areas, some sloped areas. So to get the general tree density, we permitted them to sample two spots to make it a little easier, and we do permit that. Again, you can see right along this back line, they put the grading lines on here. There's also a conservation easement set as part of this subdivision. It's a cluster subdivision. You can see the tree protection right up against the grading line, which again indicates that they're trying to be a little careful, not over clearing. And then the next sheet. Shows you their list. This is their inventory list, which is required on all tree plans. It gives you the tree number, which corresponds to the symbol on the plan, the DBH size, the species of the tree, and the tree condition. And now every lot the engineer went through, did the calculations for the pre-construction and post-construction total, how many trees were required, and how many trees required by size. And of course, I selected these plans because they represent the better quality tree preservation plans we've received. We get some that are not this legible. I wish they were all like this. Very clear, and it's easy to check for compliance. The other thing to remember is with the tree preservation plan is to then look at the landscape plan and make sure that those trees that are being proposed on the tree preservation plan are accounted for on the landscape plan and at the proper sizes. This happens all the time where they tell the landscape, usually the landscape plan is done by a separate firm. They give them a count of what's supposed to be planted and they don't size them accordingly. Something we catch all the time. And then they just have to work it out and make their plans agree. With that, I'm gonna just end with my information. I said we're planning to do another update in next year. Again, I'd like to see something in our I don't know if it's going to be in our tree preservation law or where we're going to put it in our zoning code, but I'd like to see all subdivisions and site plans have a minimum tree density, whether they're doing removals or not. Because right now, if you're not doing removals, you're not bound to the 17 per acre, even though the landscape, the Architectural Landscape Commission will require plantings. I'd like to see something more binding. Also, the 4-inch caliper replacement trees, we're being told might be a little onerous for the developer. That's a very large tree, so we may actually we may take that category out and just go between 3 and 3.5 caliper. It just might be an unreal expectation right now. 4-inch caliper trees requires pretty heavy equipment to put in place and are rather expensive. But that's going to be all further discussion with our landscape architect, and hopefully we'll get something codified next year. So that's all I have. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to take them. Okay, Kate, I guess I'll let you continue.
Sorry, I was talking. Of course, forgot to unmute myself. Yes, thank you for that. Let's let Warren go from the Village of Montebello, and we'll take the questions at the end if that's okay.
Great.
Thank you very much for inviting me to participate and for tolerating the fact that doing this completely extemporaneously without any slides or anything like that. But I've been around long enough, I could talk for hours if you wished, anecdotally on the subject, and I'm sure you don't wish. I want to thank James for teaching me some things about Clarkstown's statute. Actually, we as a village, when we formed in 1986, adopted our first tree law in 1988 after our zoning and law commission met and evolved all the statutes. Obviously, we started with Ramapo statutes, and there was the vestige, almost said vestigial, of a tree law there, which became part of our statute and tree law in 1988. But just like the town of Clarkstown, as you just heard, we look at that pretty frequently, and we've amended it 5 times since, and it's getting more and more sophisticated. And in fact, I was told at one time we had the most courageous and stringent tree law in the state of New York, and in fact, got many inquiries about it over time. So I assume that vestiges, to use that word again, of our tree law became other tree laws in the state. And to let you know, as far as the legality of the restrictions that we have, we've been challenged twice. And if anyone wants the citations, just call me at the village at 845-368-2211 and leave a message, and I'll definitely get back to you with the information. But both cases that we were challenged in would have the name of a plaintiff, Novie, N-O-V-I-E. And as a matter of fact, the first challenge is why we have our own court system in Montebello. We were prosecuting someone for violating a tree law. They alleged that our tree law was unconstitutional and a taking. Both parties briefed it. The town justice forgot about the case, I assume, and 6 months later was reminded, and from her seat rendered a 24-word decision, obviously not disturbed by any of the briefing done by both sides, quite seriously, and saying our tree law was unconstitutional. We appealed to the appellate term in 2012, I believe it was. And again, the plaintiff was Novie, N-O-V. The appellate term decision didn't come out immediately, but there was more activity on the subject parcel. And as a consequence of more activity, they then brought a case in the Southern District of New York, the federal court. And Kathy Seibel in a little bit after that, but before the appellate term ruled on our law, found in a 30-page decision that to the extent various arguments were made, that the complaint should be dismissed, and that we were within our rights to establish such a law. And then the appellate term rendered their decision after that. So again, if you need that information and want to see a thoroughly written decision, I'll make it available to you. Primarily, I want to talk a little bit about the differences between us and the town and evolutionary areas that still exist within our code. Our code provision is in 176 of the Village of Montebello Code, and again, call the village if you want a copy, or general code, you can get on their website and get a copy of any part of our codes. In particular, 176.6. There's similarities, but our primary activity is applications to remove trees by individual property owners, not in subdivisions. Pretty much we're built out. So there are not too many divisions coming on, but there are commercial properties coming on. And of course, they're subject to rules very similar to the town of Clarkstown. As far as what we consider a significant tree requiring a permit, it is 4 inches of caliper at the 4-foot mark from the ground. And all trees of that nature require a permit. If a tree is dead or dying, then it's a simple application. And our permit fees are quite reasonable, $10 per permit, no matter what the application is for. We prefer that people come in and apply, and the staff is pretty well trained to assist people in doing that. But if it's dead or dying or in imminent danger, it's $10 total. And you need an arborist report, although we've learned to trust the many licensed tree removal companies. So if they have or worked with an arborist, and if one of the principals of the company says that it's dead or dying, we'll count that to initiate the process. But we send out our village engineer or his designee to make sure, especially if it's a larger removal. The thing that you did hear Mr. Crate talk about, but we call it slightly different, AOR, we call it, and that's as of right. If the tree is not dead or dying or imminently endangering anything, or if it's not in the footprint of a building project, then you have limitations similar to the town of Clarkstown, but different. We allow one tree of that minimum size that I mentioned and above per 10,000 square feet per a 2-year period. And then in the middle of this, we realize, well, we have some really large parcels out there too in Montebello, because it has some rural aspects to it. And that could be an enormous number of trees cumulatively year after year after year. So we put a cap on it midstream, and the cap is one tree, again, per 10,000 square feet per 2-year period, a maximum of 8 trees over 2 years, no matter the size of the parcel, and a maximum of 12 trees over 6 years, no matter the size of the parcel. How is this translated? Well, we have a similar system to Clarkstown. If you want to take more trees than you're entitled to, or if you've taken down trees unlawfully and we're prosecuting, and you're potentially facing a fine, as well as compensatory plantings or compensatory payments, similar to the wording that Clarkstown uses, but it's our wording, then that will control. The tricky part there is, and I'm not so sure we have it exactly right, is, well, what do you do if somebody took down a 20-inch caliper tree? Obviously, you can't replace a 20-inch caliper tree with a like kind. So somehow or another, you have to come up with an equivalency of smaller trees and greater in number. And we leave that determination to our planning board if it gets to that point. Many times, for example, in a building project, if the project is going to remove what we call an extensive amount of trees, which is more than the AOR or the allowable removal, the building inspector will send it to our engineer, who is our tree designee, or we'll send it to the planning board to determine if there's a reason for it and to allow that excessive removal, or whether in fact to compensate, you're going to have to put in something into the tree fund or put in compensatory plants. Now, I have to tell you, we don't view compensatory planting as something that's punitive, because after all, those plants are going back on the same property and they're enhancing that property. And in fact, we've had owners who have said, I don't like those 40 trees where they are. I want to make that a field, but I can afford it. I don't mind planting 40 trees that you say at other places on my property. And if the property is large enough and accommodated, this happened. In one case, I think of 52 trees were removed, but without a permit. And we came in and we caught it. And by the way, when that happens, it is a difficult process proving what went wrong, what was done wrong, rather. I'm sorry. And often if somebody's going to do extensive tree removal without a permit, they're wise enough to do it on the weekend or without the light of day, and get someone in to stump the grinder stumps and throw over chips and other kinds of things to try to camouflage it. So it's a difficult job for due process reasons, because after all, if you're going after somebody for doing something illegal where they might be fined, it's quasi-criminal or quasi-violative, and does require due process and careful proof. And frankly, we have a very independent judiciary in Montebello, and they'll make the right decision from their perspective as an independent judge in every case. And they're not swayed by the fact that they're appointed by the village. And getting back to that, by the way, when I mentioned the 2 cases that were challenged and where the town judge, just from the seat of her pants, so to speak, found our law unconstitutional without showing any signs that she had read the briefing, that is when Montebello finally decided to create its own court system. That wasn't the only thing, but it was the straw that finally broke the camel's back, so to speak. And we did create our own court system right after that. So that had a profound effect that way. I do want to say, as a small village, unlike the town of Clarkstown, which is obviously got, I don't know, 16, maybe 20 times, 25 times our population and much greater area than we have. A village cannot exceed 5 square miles. We're 4 3/4, and we have about 5 to 6,000 residents. There are other ways that we have found that cumulatively in a small village save foliage, save trees. One of them is we recently adopted a scenic and historic roads overlay district to echo all of the roads that Rochambeau, General Rochambeau, and the French armies utilized during the Revolutionary War. And we made those, all of those roads, scenic and historic overlay district roads. And from the center line of the road reaching in 250 feet, if you're doing something to the exterior of your structure or your grounds, you have to get a certificate of appropriateness from our HPPC, which is our Historic Preservation and Parks Commission. And we look at things that, as to, what preserves the natural look. Obviously, 250 years later, it's not looking the same, but still keep it as close as we can. Same with the plantings. And in particular, as far as plantings are concerned, we require that a 10% of the depth of the property buffer of natural species be on such a road. So obviously there's plantings there now, but we require that you supplement it a bit if you're changing the exterior of your structure or the foliage in some extraordinary way. So we have that. We also, at the same time, in that context, require that if there was a natural stone wall there at one time and the stones are scattered all over the property, we're not saying you have to come back and build a perfectly mitered stone wall, but we are saying pick up the straggled stones and kind of line them up and pile them up again where the original farmer's wall was. So we get that benefit from that methodology too. Other than that, any questions you have, anything else, just get in touch with me via the village. Happy to address anything, share our thinking on the law, even let you know what's worked, what hasn't worked. I will tell you what would be very helpful to everyone is if you talk to Louise at our village hall. She's done a fantastic job of keeping records of tree permits and also conservation easement condition. And as another way you can keep track of the foliage in the trees. If you have a lot of conservation easements in your municipal entity, we actually keep hard records on our conservation easements and the conditions, and go out and survey them often and put that in the hard historical record, and also write to the owners and tell them, get that swing set out of there, get that 5 set out of there. It's for conservation, it's not to be used for those purposes. And then we go back and check. So all of that contributes to the natural flora and fauna. But here's the kind of thing, I don't know if you could see it, just to give you the general idea. She does these reports annually, and they're fantastic. And for example, in 2022, just to let you know how much our tree law really does work, and how our populace does abide by it. In 2022, we had 480 the applications to remove 480 trees as of right, and the applications to remove 71, either one singular or bunched together, dead or imminently dangerous trees. So people do take it seriously, and we find newcomers are not used to it, and sometimes we have to jump on them, but mostly people do, and we advertise it quite often. Thank you. Okay.
Yep,
Any
there I go again.
questions, put it
Thank
to the
you.
chat room and I'll...
Thank you very much, gentlemen. What just happened? She took me, my screen went. Well, you know what I'll say? I'll just start with you, Warren, if I could. It's so impressive what you've been doing, what you've been accomplishing, where you've been accomplishing it, and for how long. For someone who's been working with municipalities for over 20 years, this just isn't what happens with what the two of you are requesting and doing on a daily basis. I guess tell me a little bit more about the village population and if there is a number of acres of conservation easement, because folks, that's another call. That's another meeting, but if you do have questions, ask Warren. You can come off mute if you'd like, or put it in the chat, but those are really great ways to save trees. So I ask you those few things, and then in the end, what is the commercial residential makeup of your municipality? Warren.
Okay, first, as far as the number of residents, the last census, we were at about low 5,000. But the demographics are changing here. The people moving in tend to have larger families now. So, and also they're seeking to enlarge their homes. So I suspect there will be more applications to remove extensive amounts of trees to get the footprints of the homes enough to have 7 and 8 bedrooms, which is more the ordinary request nowadays. So again, about 5,000, but now I would suspect we're closer to 6,000 residents and about 1,560 residences, homes, mostly single family, although there's a few, there's one project of affordable homes that's off the affordable list that has 93 units in it. And there's some senior home housing, but other than that, that's the number of residences. So figure for that number of residences and that number of people, that's a lot of applications on trees. The second question, conservation easements. The reason we have a lot of properties impacted by conservation easements is we formed this village when the Schwartz Estate, which became Montebello Pines, and it's about 245 acres and ended up being 170 homes or so, was completely just an estate with an estate house and a couple outlying buildings. And we feared what the town planned as far as high density housing there and other uses for it. And we are the lowest populated area of the town, and we had no representation on any of the town's boards or commissions. So we said, we better form so we could protect our flanks and our backyards and make sure that the rural quality we wanted to preserve stayed that way. So we formed with that in mind. And we are, I think, the first municipality in Rockland County to have solar power at our village hall. We're definitely the first to have had electric filling stations at our village hall, which we've just upgraded. We have solar power at our community center on Route 202 on Haverstraw Road. And we are the first to have been named the Tree City and to be given Arbor Day awards. And modesty aside, they dedicated 12 acres and made it the Warren Burbot Nature Preserve. So we have that we're preserving. And every year on Arbor Day, we plant another Crimson King maple along the road there. So we've been oriented that way, and where we can acquire property, we've done so. One of these days, we wanted to establish a greenway where animals and so forth can pass undisturbed across the entire village. We can't quite do it, but we're getting there. So that should answer that. Thank you.
Yes, not so much a greenway, a wildlife crossing. Is that what you mean more of?
Yeah, not
a
quite
critter
to
crossing?
the extent of the one in California. You
Right.
know about the one in California, right?
Well, I mean, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
a lot of
no,
these
I have.
projects go over large transportation corridors. So they'd either, for everyone who needs to know, they either build up or build under a tunnel so that the animals, the wildlife can cross safely, thereby reducing accidents. And so it's a great safety mechanism. Is that what you meant, Warren? Or do you mean a typical greenway, linear
No,
park?
I meant both, but we also wanted to do a contiguous way for people to bike and to jog and get all around the village. And there are places where we just can't bridge some of the roadways. So we're not contiguous, but yes, I am talking about that.
Okay. And so when you say this population growth, I mean, when you say 7, 8 bedrooms, I say, wow, what are the taxes? But yes, high.
Yeah, but not because of us, but the village taxes represent 5 to 6% of the overall tax bill. But the school tax here, I mean, I alone on my back house pay like 43,000 a year in real property taxes, so they're high.
Okay, yeah, that's sizable. But the $10 permit for a tree removal is pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
I don't think you addressed the question about commercial. So do you have a commercial offset? And then Jim, I was going to ask you about that too. So both of you does this apply to commercial or is it just individual dwelling units?
You
No,
mean
well,
the law itself?
Well, you had that one site plan,
we're
Jim.
similar to the town of
Yeah.
Clarkstown. I frankly,
Oh, yeah, well, I mean, site plans are required for all multifamily development and all commercial development over 500 square foot addition. So yes, the tree preservation law applies to commercial development, certainly. In fact, most of the tree preservation plans we see are commercial development or redevelopment. Aside from the subdivisions, but we're close to getting built out. We're well over 90% built out, and the land that's left for subdividing isn't subdivided for a reason. It's either environmentally constrained or for some other reason. It's the subdivisions we're getting are more difficult, put it that way.
definitely they're not economically viable. They have such extreme conditions geologically and water-wise and so forth that to build on them, you couldn't sell what you built for the price it cost you to build it. So
Yeah, and that's why they're left, and
That's
we're-
right. So the lowest hanging fruit has already been eaten. They're going higher in the tree. Again, your county compared to Orange County is much more desirable, and that's where they want to be. So, but it is coming to Orange. And that's something where I have to push back when one of you talked about the 4-inch caliber tree for maybe your next iteration, Jim. You know, they are easy to come by. There are machines to get them in. Certainly we see all the new fancy developments that open from Disney to Legoland. They have mature trees, they get it. So it is a little bit more of money for labor and demand, but it is there. And if it, one thing also I didn't hear was the maintenance. Do either of you have a long-term maintenance plan, especially for the commercial entities? But yeah,
yes,
so do you have a warranty bond?
we require a map note that I believe takes them out to 3 years. But the landscape plan is, they're supposed to maintain as far as the landscape goes, the plan goes indefinitely. As far as the 4-inch caliper tree goes, we don't want to, I don't want to make it seem like we're moving backwards, but we're trying to walk the thin line between, catering to an environment and development, I guess to say. It's just if I've heard the 4-inch caliper is starting to get into an area where it's requires a lot of work. Again, it's codified right now. I don't know if we're going to do that. It's something we're thinking about doing. I have to look further into it.
I hope I didn't confuse it, but the 4-inch caliper in my case, or the village's case, was you need a removal permit at that size and up. We're not saying replace it necessarily with a 4-inch caliper. And
Yeah,
as I mentioned before,
that's
impractical,
correct. Yeah, it's not. We're actually thinking about lowering the 8-inch minimum size. I don't know if we go as low as 4-inch, but maybe to 6-inch. But as far as getting a 4-inch caliper tree from a nursery, I mean, like you said, but large theme parks and large corporations can afford that. But
Yes.
we're not trying to hinder individual business owners or property owners to any onerous extent.
I can echo that. The last time they put in an Arbor Day, Crimson King maple on my nature preserve, see that? It's mine, I'm possessive. It was 4 inches in caliber and it cost us $1,200. And the next time we tried to get one done, it was like $1,600 and we said no.
Yeah, it's the 4 inches is really getting into a different realm as far as replanting goes. And we got to further consult with some of our developers and our landscape architect and just come up with something. We want to make sure our code is fair, but I don't want to make it sound like we're starting to take a step backwards, because the next amendment is going to include additional provisions that are going to, like I said, hopefully make all sites, whether removal is taking place or not, have a minimum acreage, or excuse me, a minimum tree density.
Right. And you said before the landscape plan goes indefinitely. What do you mean by that? Because I guess in Orange County, we don't get a lot of warranty bonds or maintenance. I think I would be willing to say, yeah, we'll do 3.5. We won't make you do 4, but you got to make sure it lives. So maybe that's how you get your way if there's careful maintenance of it so it survives.
Yeah,
Well, you have,
I know it's the requirement is 3 years. I can't recall the bonding details outright. Uh, but supposedly your a landscape plan and what's shown on it is supposed to be maintained indefinitely. Unless I'm wrong.
And then we talk enforcement has to be by your local town, one of you and your engineer can't be everywhere. So, but that's my argument. I would say you're right for everything you're stating about the 4-inch caliper. You go down a little bit, but you increase the warranty bond so that hopefully it does live. Warren, were you going to say something else?
well, no, I am saying even in residential neighborhoods, the trees are in those tree planting easements, or off the side, usually 5 feet off the side of the road and parallel to the road. So that easement is actually owned by the village. The easement is not the fee to the land, but the easement for trees is owned by the village. So that's where we go to our tree fund that we have, funds that we have, and every now and then we'll look around and see where the trees haven't done well, and we'll replace them, especially if the residents ask us to. So, but it's expensive, so we can't do that many at a time.
No. I would like to read this one question verbatim, gentlemen, and then we will move on to Gary. In his densely populated municipality, my research shows that the DPW removes more trees annually from public land, the first 12 feet of private property, public parks, etc., than the number removed by private property owners or developers. How does a tree code properly address this activity? The DPW has no oversight, only a single third-party arborist who often is not consulted. And these removals occur behind the scenes from public view, not publicly available information. Ms. Jay Demmer, if you want to come off and microphone and talk to Warren and Jim about this specifically, please do. But, this reminds me, there's also the removal by the utilities, which I'm assuming has jurisdiction over your municipality and your rules. Can either of you speak to that?
Well, we don't have a DPW in Montebello, so, but I don't want to narrow the focus of the question and point it towards Jim, but we don't have one. But on the other hand, that is true. We have very little control over the utilities that are coming in and removing trees and limbs because of the overhead lines that are under the trees. So we almost have no say. We do try to exert pressure other ways, but we don't have black and white control.
Yeah, we've had incidents where, especially beneath the power lines, utility companies have done quite a bit of clearing, not necessary removals, but some extensive trimming around them that left some areas not looking so hot. I mean, it all comes down to a matter of jurisdiction. If you're talking about your DPW, that's your municipality. Why they're removing those trees, I mean, that's a matter you'll have to address with your local government. If it's a safety issue, I mean, a lot of trees were planted beneath power lines, and the improper species were selected at the time, and now they're interfering with them. We've had a lot of storms. We've had incidents where trees have unfortunately resulted in fatalities. I can see some municipalities might be very proactive and want to take down anything they deem dangerous. But it's all jurisdictional matter. If it's in the right of way and the municipality has control over that area, you'd like to see maybe some better communication between the municipality and the public about what they're doing as far as tree removals. But how do you stop that? Again, if it's in their jurisdiction, they have the right to those removals. Sounds like it might be a matter of communication at that point.
Yeah. And overhead lines, have any of you had the opportunity in the village or in dense areas to work with the utilities to try and get them to go underground?
We have during several of our Hamlet Center renovations. We did not have much luck with that. unfortunately, it would have been something we would like. All our new subdivisions, I think for the past over 15 years, maybe 2 decades,
Or under.
require underground lines. It's very noticeable when you go into the newer subdivisions. You see the green boxes instead of the wires. It looks great, and it certainly makes maintenance during storms a lot easier. But as far as the general transmission lines that are down most of our roads, no, we've not had much luck despite trying.
Warren,
Yeah.
no comment?
Yeah, well, I do have the comment personally in that my back line touches the westerly line of what was the Schwartz Estate and became Montebello Pines. And that subdivision, even though it was built more than 20 years ago in Montebello, we insisted that it all be undergrounded. And sometimes we had big storms here, and I have no power, and I'm looking over my back line and I see that all lit up, and I was very envious until I went and got a 20 kilowatt generator installed. So yes. Yeah.
I would note that
Big difference.
the power companies usually provide a list of preferred plantings for any tree plantings in proximity to power lines, and it's usually pretty easily. I know Orange and Rockland has a list out there. I'm sure it would be very easy to get through their website. So that is out there.
If you find that and you could put it in the
And
chat, a link to that, that would be great, Jim.
Sure.
Yes, I'll just end on saying Village of Washingtonville in Orange County was offered to do something at one of their major intersections and declined it decades ago. So this is the story I hear, and I cringe every time I go there because they could be doing such great transportation improvements. All right, thank you, and please continue to use the chat. Now, I'd like to introduce EPA's Albany Office Director, Gary Klewinski. He's been with the EPA since 2010, and as the project director, Gary oversees the Hudson River PCB's Superfund site. Prior to joining EPA, he worked in consulting for 27 years. He holds college degrees in engineering and geology. He will introduce Larissa, because I just learned tonight Larissa's gonna bat last. Please take it away, Gary, and thank you for your patience.
Sure. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting us. Larissa is going to be advancing the slides, and there's a portion of the presentation I wanted. Larissa is our community involvement specialist on Hudson, and she coordinates our outreach efforts. So I'd like her to kind of explain some of the work that we're doing in that area. So with that, Larissa, you want to say hello quick, and then maybe we'll get started?
Hi, everyone. Thanks very much. We're going to go ahead and get started here. And Kate, if you'd like us to advance at all, I'm not sure how we're doing with time. If you'd like us to skip ahead a little bit, we can. Otherwise, we'll just start as we had planned. You just let us know.
Let's do that. And if you think you could save a minute or two, go ahead. But otherwise, let's give the people what they came for.
Okay. All right. Gary, then I'll go ahead. I'll go ahead and I'll skip ahead to the
let's do that. I'll do a little I'll just speak about the upper river a little bit just to orient everyone. But yeah, we'll go to the lower river. Okay, so I think most people on the call are probably familiar with the massive dredging project that was done up in the upper part of the upper Hudson River. From Fort Edward to Waterford. Basically, the way we talk about the Hudson in terms of the 200-mile PCB Superfund site, which goes from the 2G plants up in Hudson Falls and Fort Edward all the way down to the battery at New York City, we kind of have the project broken up into the upper and the lower Hudson and then some subunits. And the Troy Dam at between Waterford and Albany, the federal dam is sort of the dividing line. So the dredging project was done in the upper Hudson. So we're working in all parts of the Hudson River still at this point. It's either investigating or following up on cleanups that have been done, holding GE accountable for the PCBs that they released. Although in the lower river, there are other contaminants from other parties that we're also evaluating. But yeah, the dredging project was completed. We're studying also in the upper part of the Hudson River. There's 6,000 acres of floodplain. When the river floods, it historically pushed PCBs up into people's backyards, into the areas that frequently flood. We're doing a comprehensive study of that in the upper Hudson, and then some other and then of course, continuing to assess how the river's recovering since we've done that big dredging project. But what we wanted to really focus on today was our new work to expand our understanding of the lower Hudson, below the federal dam down to New York City. So we approached GE a while back last year and said, hey, we need to know more about the Hudson. Your PCBs are there. We'd like you to cooperate with us and do more sampling. We had always collected samples in the lower Hudson as part of kind of understanding if we were going to impact the lower Hudson with our upper river work, or just kind of generally how things were behaving in the lower Hudson. But now we're really focusing on a more comprehensive study. Now, this study is scheduled to go for, Larissa, can we go up a slide? Advance the slide, please. So yeah, again, the legal agreement was signed in September of 2022, and the field work began this spring. It's a phased approach. Next slide, please. And again, I just kind of reviewed, kind of one point about the lower Hudson. I know you guys all know this, but it's a really complicated river system. It's saltwater, freshwater, it's an estuary. There's different types of species of fish and other animals, and it's tidal. So it's complicated, and of course we need to understand it better, since there are still fish advisories and fish that can't be readily consumed, which I could talk about a little bit more. Next slide, please. So what we did was we said to ourselves, okay, we want to get in the river, the lower river, quickly. We want GE to lead because it's primarily their PCBs that we're most concerned about. And so we said, okay, we want to do more water column sampling, more fish sampling, more sediment sampling. And so we're doing all those things as part of this investigation. That will last 2 to 3 years. And on the sediment side, we're focused on a couple of different types of sediment. We're focused on the very thin layers of sediment that deposit each season into the river. And then also where we collect fish, we want to understand the concentration of the sediments near where the fish reside. And then also we want to understand the history of the sediment accumulations in the bottom of the river. And so we're doing deeper cores, and we're slicing those and analyzing them for different indicator markers and PCBs and other contaminants. Next slide, please. So on the water column, we've increased our sampling to 5 stations: Albany, Troy, Catskill, Poughkeepsie, Newburgh, Tappan Zee. We're sampling on a monthly basis. We'll do that for a year, take a look at the data, see what we're getting, and then decide on what the future long-term program will be. Next slide, please. On the fish monitoring, we are focusing on all of the different species. Some species are migratory, like the striped bass, white perch. There's ones that reside in, more residentially, like some of for freshwaters, like bass and perch, and for saltwater, it's some of the other species like carp that don't really migrate so much. So we're also doing crab, eel, and again, all these are being analyzed for PCBs and other contaminants. Next slide, please. And then this is kind of a list of all the different types of fish that we're collecting and where we're collecting them, all throughout the lower Hudson. It's about a total of somewhere between 800 and 900 different fish across this suite of species. Next slide, please. And then on the sampling for this year, we went out and did the recently deposited sampling. So as the sediment comes into the river from the tributaries into the main part of the river, it carries certain signals with it from the fallout in the atmosphere. So we're measuring what we call beryllium-7 signals and other radionuclides, and to be sure that it's the fresh sediment. And then we're measuring the concentration of the fresh sediment. That'll give us an idea of kind of what's coming into the river from the tributaries, as well as what's in the main tributaries, the main length of the river. And you can see we're doing hundreds of samples. Next slide, please. And then for next year, next spring, what we'll do is we'll go to the areas where we collected the fish this year, and we'll take the top foot or so in 2 segments and get a sense of what the sediment concentrations are where the fish reside, in particular the fish that don't migrate, to get a sense of the relationship between fish, sediment, and water, to really understand how a river is behaving and the system is recovering over time, how contaminated it is. You really have to measure all 3, fish, sediment, and water. All of this is obviously driven by the fact that the fish can't be readily consumed. The risk to people are from consumption of fish. We encourage everyone to follow the fish consumption advisories put out by the New York State Department of Health. We work closely with them, and we want to make sure that people are abiding by those advisories. Next slide, please. And then the high resolution course we'll do next fall. We want to try to get at least 6 or more good quality cores. It's very challenging to push these cores and get good sediment profiles where we can understand how the sediments have accumulated over time, whether the sediment profiles are getting worse, getting better, staying the same. How concerned do we need to be about the sediments in the bottom of the lower Hudson River? Next slide, please. And then this is just a kind of a timeline. So this is a really kind of a quick hitter in terms of the studies that EPA typically does. And then we'll regroup. We're sampled this year. We're just about done with most of the sampling. The water sampling will continue for this year. Next year, a lot is focused on sediment. Other contaminants will also be, or other more fish and more water samples will be taken next year. And then we'll kind of regroup with all that data in 2025 and then decide on what additional studies are needed. Typically for a system like this, you would have very comprehensive, very intensive studies like we did in the Upper Hudson. That's not what this is. This is really more of a let's get a quick look and get an understanding of how to build and develop the scopes of any future work that might need to be done. Next slide, please. And then back to the Upper Hudson for a minute, because this is something you may hear about in the coming months. Whenever there's a cleanup that's done and contamination is left behind, in other words, you can't clean it all up, or it's decided that all of it won't be cleaned up. In the Upper Hudson, it just wasn't possible to get all the PCBs out. So there is contamination that remains. Wherever there's contamination that remains, and the remedy or the cleanup continues, EPA every 5 years reviews how that cleanup is performing. And so we've been doing that, working hard over about the last year and a half, analyzing data from the Upper Hudson, and we'll be coming out with a determination about how well things are going with the performance of the cleanup for the Upper Hudson. That report will come out probably in the next 2-3 months. It'll come out for public comment, so people have time to review it. It's going to be like roughly a 700 to 800-ish page report, so it's going to be quite a bit of material. The Hudson is has a very long history, as you guys all know, and it's been studied extensively. So there's a lot of data to review. Larissa, next slide. And maybe Larissa, can you jump in and maybe give a little update on our outreach and the community advisory group?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So again, my name is Larissa Romanowski, and I'm a community involvement coordinator. I work with Gary out of the Hudson River office. So getting back to what Gary was saying, for many years, our focus was primarily on the Upper Hudson, just because we were doing a very extensive dredging project. But last fall, we made this important announcement about the studies and investigation in the Lower Hudson River. So we felt that it was very important that we are engaging the new communities, the folks that are not familiar with us. So for the last several months, we've been working on making new contacts, introducing ourselves. We've been reaching out to communities and new stakeholder groups. and the counties. We want to make sure that they know what we're working on. So we've been holding a lot of individual meetings with folks and briefings, much like this one. And in addition to that, we also have a number of resources available on our site webpage. It's www.epa.gov/Hudson River PCBs. We do have a fact sheet that we issued after the announcement, and it includes a lot of details about the sampling work. And in addition to that, we also did a public meeting in the spring. It's a very extensive overview of the work, and it's available online. So you're welcome to visit our webpage to learn more about that. But in addition, the slide that we have up here, one of the things we wanted to note also is that we have a community advisory group that's been very involved with the project for many years, actually formed in 2004. So one of the things that we've been working on with the CAG is identifying new folks, new interests from the lower river that may want to join the CAG. Gary gives regular updates at the CAG meetings. We put together updates, fairly extensive updates on all of the work that's going on in the river. And now we'll be including the lower river studies as well. The CAG meetings are open to the public, so I would encourage anyone who has an interest, certainly you're welcome to participate in those meetings. But again, they are working to make sure that they're including those additional interest groups that may not have historically been represented. Although I will add, and I will say that many of the more prominent environmental organizations from the lower river have been members of the community advisory group for a number of years. But just wanted to make sure that folks know that that CAG is expanding. We're looking forward to working with some additional faces on the CAG over the coming years. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and we'll transition to our closing. But Gary, I'm sure, is welcome to take some questions, but our contact information is available here. You're certainly always welcome to reach out to me or Gary if you have any questions. We also have a site email list, a listserv. Please, by all means, feel free to share that with folks, your constituents or in your communities. We're happy to have people join our listserv to make sure they can get all the latest information and updates about our work. And with that, I'll turn it back to Gary for any questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate what you just said. You started with the up north, the PCBs, DuPont, right? It was predominantly
General Electric. And,
General Electric. That was it.
Monsanto, supplied PCBs to GE.
Right. So, and it's not probably just them. There's been industry and chemical plants up and down the river for decades, unfortunately. So there's a lot of point and non-point pollution. And I'm assuming that's been studied for decades, whether it's litigiously them saying, we're not the only ones, don't blame us. I'm sure that's been examined. But now, what is it? Where does climate change and resiliency come into play there? Specifically, again, how the water's either rising, increased stormwater in, where does that point and non-point pollution? Is that something that EPA is working to prevent? And if so, how?
Yeah, it's a good question. So in terms of point sources and the lower Hudson, we definitely are going to consider any point sources and what they might be contributing still to this day, but also importantly, what they've contributed into the river historically. So, if there, let's say, for example, a hot spot that in the river and the sediments that's accumulated from those point sources, we'll pick that up in our sampling eventually. But there's been, New York State Department of Environmental Conservation has a number of sites that they've been working on. For example, the BASF site up near Albany, the Anaconda Wire or Hastings site, that's a big PCB site near the Tappan Zee. Bic Cable, another one south of the Tappan Zee. So, I mean, there's it's a lot of work. We have a lot of work ahead of us to sort this out, sort out the difference between other folks' contaminants, G's contaminants. I mean, a lot of the contaminants that came down, in particular the PCBs, are GEs, but they're not the only one. The Port of Albany has some PCB challenges there historically. So we're doing the sampling, and I talked about fish, sediment, and water and the relationship, but really there's a whole nother part of my team who's working on just what you had mentioned, the point source stuff and whatnot. Also, there's various project considerations that we're aware of that the Corps of Engineers is considering in terms of climate change and sea level rise and things like that. In terms of the remedy, the cleanup for the upper Hudson River, as part of that 5-year review that I mentioned, we will be, there's a section in that report about climate change and climate effects on that cleanup, on that portion of the cleanup. So yeah, I think we've got it covered in a bunch of different ways, and we have quite a bit of work ahead of us in particular for the lower Hudson, to really sort all that out.
Yeah, and that's going straight in. The little bit we could do is with the stormwater, planting trees, pervious pavement, etc.
Absolutely.
We have someone from the city of Newburgh here. Think that's Orange County when we've been hit, most recently Highlands. But maybe it really does, the two topics do lend themselves to each other right there, that more trees, more absorption, more filtering, less sediment into the
Exactly.
river would help. How does EPA do that on a federal level when there is home rule in New York State?
Yeah, so that might be a little bit out of my area of expertise. I'm so focused in on the specific details of all of this, the 200-mile Superfund site, what we're doing as an agency. But, these are all the kinds of things that EPA considers and is concerned about. And, the points that you were making about, in fact, that one study I'd mentioned about the recently deposited sediment, I'm guessing that because of all the good work by, having controls on stormwater runoff and having less of these, construction projects that release, sediments into the tributaries and whatnot, all of those kinds of things, those requirements, those regulations are all going to help with, minimizing, future, discharges into these water bodies. They've taken quite a beating over the years by, back in the day when those requirements were not in place. So all of these different requirements are really helpful.
So I guess I'm going to ask you to go back to your bosses and say, well, we need some of that federal bill money and IRA money, and say we need it for planting trees. If you're not giving the municipalities, we just talked about the cost of the tree, the cost to plant it. The municipalities need the help to get those trees in the ground. So because the feds can't do anything else but incentivize with monies, hopefully the EPA on some level could say, all right, we got to offer forestry grants, whether it's I know that they're big on urban forestry for cooling, but for this particular as well. And Jim had to leave us from the town of Clarkston, but I would imagine towns and villages would also do some benefit from there. The point is they need to be financially incentivized to do this. Mr. Demmer pointed out that DPW, his town DPW is taking down trees. My county DPW, I can't get them to plant trees. I'm begging for a tree inventory on county roads. No, just even pollinator plants. So unless you incentivize municipalities with monies, they're not doing it voluntarily. So.
Yeah. I have a little bit of personal sort of involvement with this because I was involved with some, trying to expand some tree planting in some nearby parks where I live and whatnot. And it really is, I appreciate listening to you guys. It is an uphill battle with, trying to find funding and trying to get people to understand. I mean, I was shocked, when we were trying to get the trees in that, there are residents who are like, we don't want trees. Like, we don't want a tree in front of our house. We don't want trees here. It's like, what? Why don't you, So yeah, I can definitely appreciate
they don't want it because they don't want to clean up the leaves.
Yeah, exactly. exactly.
And
So,
that's, I think that's unless Warren says otherwise, but to me, I share the same profound surprise when people say, not only do I not want your free trade, but I'm taking down these trees. And I said,
yeah,
"Oh, I don't, do you
yeah,
explain the benefit of the cooling?" And that is why kudos to Warren and the Village of Montebello to be able to really root their tree law in the aesthetic benefit to the entire community. I read it today, the aesthetic benefit. That's really what it's about, the benefit. So, not a lot of places think like that. I'd like to ask another question, if I may.
sure.
And it's really about the effect of non-native species, whether flora or fauna, the fish. I won't pretend to know what they are, and I lost the flora. What's the terrible one that makes the black spiky things? The chestnut, right?
Water chestnut, yeah.
Water chestnut, right. So how is this playing into your efforts? And yes.
Oh boy, you'll have to have me back for another hour on that one. That's a huge one for us. So if you can imagine, we did so much dredging in the upper Hudson River, and we destroyed the habitat. We took out all the plants wherever we dredged, and the project had a requirement to reconstruct the habitat and then monitor it until it naturally, gets back to its normal, its original conditions. And it's like with your lawn, or if you scratch your lawn and the first thing that comes back are the weeds, right? So you don't get what you want back right away. So same thing happens with the dredging project, where we disturb the environment. All of a sudden we're getting all these invasive species coming in. Um, Luckily we had well thought it through, and we have requirements for General Electric to remove the invasive species as the areas recover. But I know that, in working with the people from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation and all of the thought that they put into trying to control the invasives throughout the Hudson, I did attend a couple of workshops a few years back. I know when Superstorm Sandy came up, I believe a lot of the habitat, a lot of the vegetation was damaged by sediment coming up the lower river, and it was fascinating for me to hear about that. And I know it is coming back, but yeah, so it's New York State is, in terms of the whole river, New York State is obviously leading, but in terms of where we did the dredging and the restoration of the upper Hudson, EPA's overseeing all of GE's work closely with New York State. So yeah, it's a real challenge. And honestly, we thought we would maybe be done with habitat from the upper Hudson by now, but Mother nature's an interesting thing. You get high flow years in the Hudson, low flow years. The plants in the river tend to like the lower flow years. The high flow years, they don't get enough light. And so the conditions are constantly kind of changing. So we're kind of looking at it going, well, did it get better? Did it get worse? Are we headed in the right direction? What's our trajectory? So a lot of things to think about there. But we have a whole team of experts working on that part of the Hudson.
So the Sandy comment you made about the vegetation being covered with silt, I thought you were going to say the invasive was covered and that was a good thing. Assuming, unfortunately, it was the good.
I don't want
or
to
both.
speak because it's not my area of expertise, but I think it's a combination of both. I think, when the native species get damaged, that the invasives take, they take advantage of that essentially.
Well, I'm just laughed because also Sandy hit Manhattan so hard.
Yeah.
They said there weren't rats for a long time in the city. So the rats definitely got taken out for a while, but they came back, boy, as we see with our New York City rat czar
That's
now.
what they do.
Who would have ever thought that would be a fully paid salaried position? So the EPA, I guess you alluded to that there are another department working on it, because now the Japanese bamboo is coming in as well and would love, like you just said, the slightly lower water to take root in there. Whether the water goes up or not, it's going to take over the whole shoreline.
Yeah. What's interesting is for certain plants, you can get rid of invasives by lowering the water. And then for some plants, it actually helps the invasives. So it's a it's a real big challenge to
Right.
kind of know how to do it. I mean, like for purple loosestrife in the upper Hudson, which we're getting in some of our reconstruction areas, they're pulling it, we're trying to avoid using herbicides because nobody wants to use herbicides, but I know New York State has had no choice but to use them in certain places. So yeah, it's
Have you found any benefit that they are at least filter feeding? They're intricate for Japanese bamboo, at least. I mean, most of them have this intricate root system. And since they are on the banks, do they hold in for erosion?
Yeah,
Something.
some of the woodier plants do, but the one in my discussions with New York State, I mean, some of their habitat people have reminded us, even though invasives are not desirable, invasives do provide habitat also, to some extent. So they no one wants them, but if they're there, they in some cases they do provide habitat. So
Yeah, I'll push back on the Japanese bamboo. I
probably
think
not. Yeah, I don't
that
know
one
I
is
don't know much, if anything, about
Yeah.
Japanese bamboo.
Well, just
but yeah.
because it takes over everything else. So then
Yeah.
they're not eating it. So there's nothing for them to eat. They
Yeah,
may be able
nothing
to
to
find
eat, but they
cooling
can
and
maybe hide in
safety.
it or something, but
Yeah, right. But
it's
then there's
minimal.
nothing to
Yeah.
eat. So, but
Yeah.
anyway, well, I do want to end on saying if anyone is interested in all of this, my kids, as part of our 4-H group, did volunteer to count the glass eels in the city of
I
Newbury
saw
coming
that.
up the Cressaya Creek. And it was a lot of fun. So if anyone
Saw that.
here would like to get involved with, I believe that was the Hudson River Environmental Society, great group, always looking for volunteers and citizen scientists. Please reach out to me. My information is in the chat, as well as the 2 links for the next 2 events, one tomorrow night and then one on October 18th on wetlands and stream protection. And tomorrow night is how to energy efficiency and EVs for municipalities. New York Power Authority will be here talking up all their programs and all the opportunities for your municipality to be energy efficient. I want to end on what I value as the most important thing. You both called it the Tappan Zee. Thank you. Thank you for calling it the Tappan Zee Bridge.
Hopefully I don't get in trouble for that.
That's right. Me too. Me too. Warren, I don't know if you want to weigh in on that, but it will always be the Tappan Zee and the
Can I make 2
Interborough
comments, or we
Parkway.
running for our life?
What was that?
Can I make some comments, or are we running for our life?
No,
keep it
well,
to one-
again, sure, make some comments, please.
Real fast. First of all, we have a 7-pond lake park, that a 24-acre park here, and we're having a lot of trouble with algae blooms. And what we did was we put in solar-powered bubblers and circulators to move the water around. And we found with some of those invasive species that they like stagnant water much more than they like moving aerated water. And the second thing, this would be a bit ironic. It seems like the Hudson River and fish are the key. In 1977, in the middle of a snowstorm, I presented to the Village of Buchanan Village Board on the issue of providing legal services to oppose the cooling towers to the atomic energy plant. And the reason for the cooling towers was to keep the water effluent, the cooling waters, from damaging the striped bass and the Hudson River. And unfortunately, I had to hand them back their retainer check because we were also local counsel for Con Edison. So there was a conflict, in my opinion. But I'm just telling you, it's a small world.
It
Yeah.
is a small world.
It is.
Thank you. And yes, those algae blooms, definitely, if we can get the water moving. I don't know if that's something that DEC or if EPA is looking into it, if either of you have comments, but how do you, it costs a lot. You got the electric, who owns the pond? Who's near it? But if that would be a simple fix, I think they would be on that. Solar energy, probably moving that lake around. Something has to happen soon. Gary Lerser, do you do anything with the harmful algal blooms?
So we have referred some concerns about, there was one concern that came to us about Saratoga Lake. We referred it to our experts within the agency. There are some treatments that can be done if they're done the right way, in a very controlled way. It's another real big challenge, and it's kind of scary, actually, especially folks who have dogs and kids and going
Right.
in water, and it's
Right.
bad news.
And the growth, the
Yeah.
fact that it's just
Becoming
happening more and
worse.
more.
Yeah.
And it's not quick to say phosphates. I'm seeing it with areas surrounded by woods, so you can't blame the lawn fertilizer and so forth. I'm not a pro at it, but I would like to study it more. It's something to be alarmed. And that's why I joke, but not really. If it's as much as putting in a few aerators, solar powered, we got to do it.
Yeah,
a
if
big
there's
one.
any inquiries about that,
Mhm.
just, you can pass them to us and we can get you to the right person at E EPA.
We
That's
did put in filtering marsh, MARSH, from the stream that goes from the golf course with all of the nutrients into these pond systems, right where the stream comes in. We planted an entire filtering marsh to try to obviate all that going downstream.
Yeah,
Oh, you did. Fantastic.
interesting.
By the golf course.
Yes,
Yeah, that's
where the
great.
golf course into the streams, into the ponds.
That's a great thing to end on. Well, that's a great takeaway. So if anyone left from Orange County, Jean, Maureen, anyone I'm missing, Gail, if you know of golf courses, let's try and get that. That would be really good. All right. So I thank you again. I'll stay on if anyone has any other questions, but I appreciate your time and I know we went a little over. So I hope to see you all tomorrow. Tell your friends, invite everyone. All is welcome. Save tax dollar money tomorrow night, same time, 5:30. Good night, all.
Thank you all.
All right, good night.